Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. As you can see, it's morning here. The sun is rising in just outside Washington, D.C. On a lovely summer day here. And we are switching gears today. We're going from the less complex to group audits. And the goal is to really start refining this draft standard right now. As a couple of things to say is clearly we're going to need some explanation of there's a certain color theme I noticed amongst a task force. So I turn it over to Len to explain said theme.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you. I know for many of you, it's pretty early in the morning. We are wearing the color orange today. In the principle of a group audit, we are one engagement team. Doesn't matter you're a group auditor or component auditors, or united in terms of achieving audit quality as a team. Number two is I pick orange, so it's my fault if the color is not a popular color to many of you, but I want to recognize that the work of the staff. I think Jasper and Dan. Jasper's being from Netherlands, and today, the Netherlands soccer team is playing in the Euro 2021, and Dan being moved to Florida, and orange is the color of Florida. So just don't recognize the work of the staff. Also recognizing we do have a group auditor performing group audits on a daily basis in Edo. Also is from Netherlands, and also a big passionate soccer fan. We'll be cheering for the Netherlands team later today, and so that's a focus. Also, one other thing is in terms of timeline of this project, we are in code orange. We're not code red yet, but this is a June meeting. We have one more meeting to go until voting out the final standards. So it's put code red, code orange next to ISA 600 project. So with that, I want to thanks the team, the staff, for being so accommodating in terms of their support in showing up in orange today. You can see Susan and Jamie and Dora in addition to other regular task force members. But you'll see Wolf is not on the call today. I think Wolf, being a Germany soccer fan, he doesn't feel strongly about wearing orange. No, that's not a reason. Wolf is getting his second COVID-19 shot this morning, so he's now joining us. So with that, I want to thank the team and the task force, and hopefully Netherlands national team will have a good result when we watch a game, or if we choose to watch a game later today. So thank you to the TAs and corresponding member who are joining us today. So with that, talk about ISA 600. So I appreciate that the board members and the TAs have a lot of things to go through this week. When without really helping you, we have a lot of agenda papers for you to read for this meeting. And also, for today's sessions, we understand we went from LCE world to a complex world of group audit. So well, thank you for making that change in terms of brains, in terms of reacting to some of the issues you're going to see and discuss later today and tomorrow. So in terms of today's discussion, I'm going to spend a few minutes in terms of what we have done since the March meetings. So Michelle, can you turn the slides one page? There have been a lot of work done, and within the task force, we had several meetings, quite a lot of meetings virtually, and those meetings have been long, 5 hours, more than 5 hours. And if we had the time in everybody's schedule, we could schedule more meetings, more calls. Just the type of issues and the complexity of issues that did require a lot of task force time in terms of discussion, try to find answers. In addition, we have done a number of outreach. We met some of the key regulatory stakeholders, IAASB Committee 1, EFIA Standard, Coordination Working Group, PIOB, as well as the IFA-SMP committee. And then the staff also had a chance to speak to the PCAOB staffs. So overall, I think they were pretty much supportive of the direction of travel, and we have done so far. There were a few comments specifically documentation, as well as the group auditors' actions to direct, supervise, review the work of a component auditor. So you probably see some of that coming through to the revised draft of ISA 600 in the agenda paper. On the PCAOB staff, just quickly, I was not in that conversation, but as far as I know, the PCAOB was supportive in terms of direction of travel, but PCAOB uses different standards. It's a work of other auditors, and they have that principal auditor and the lead auditor type of concept. But overall, some of the requirements, application materials we have in our draft were consistent with their views as well. I think there's one area they also, I would say struggle is that they observe on the inspection is the audits of the equity type of investment. I think we recognize that in our discussion over the past year. That has been an issue as well. So in addition to PCAOB, we had a call with the IAASB team on their projects, Group Audit Independence Task Force. This is the one area, more coordinations of more work needs to be done after the June meeting. We already have plans for 2 meetings lined up. One will be involving the entire task force of ISA 600 and the entire task force of a Group Audit Independence Task Force. So more work will be done, and they just had a meeting last week in terms of their project. So we'll get a better understanding and debrief on their board discussion, so we can move on with our project. And their plan is to issue their ED in December 2021. So basically, the same month we are issuing our final standards, we'll go out with the ED. I think that timing is try to be aligned, that we finalize the standards so they can move on with theirs. But it's important we finalize the wordings and some of the requirements relate to compliance with relevant ethical requirements, so they can move on with the exposure draft. So that seems to be a lot of coordination, but also at least a timing alignment is in place. We also spoke to and working with other task forces as well, and less complex entities. I think Kai already talked about it, so don't want to speak further on that. But the CUSP project, spoken to Brad and the staff. We are focusing on getting ISA 600 out. There might be areas that in wording, in some of the paragraphs, if we can make some quick changes, quick wins, we'll do that. After this meeting, the staff will reach out to the CUSP staff again in terms of there might be areas we can further improve our drafting, but the goal is very focused on getting 600 out in December. The focus has been that we are working towards getting 600 in a place that approved in December. The CAS project is a continued project, have different timeline, but it's important that we as a task force, 600 task force, is the technical issues on 600. But clearly, CUSP is in the back of our mind. And also, I know Roger has sent us some comments in the last few hours, and with some CUSP considerations. So I appreciate what Roger has done ahead of this meeting. The staff also reach out to the staff of Professional Skepticism Working Group and also the Technology Working Group, those specific paragraphs that we asking the staff, those two task forces to take a look and offer comments and suggestions. So more work will follow up after the June meeting and to get the input. So those are in terms of summary, what we have done since the March board meeting, as well as some of the outreach we have done and coordination with other task force, working group, and IAASB. So moving on today's meeting, Michelle, next slide, please. As I said, we have a lot of work, a lot of agenda paper. So be focused. We will take that you've read the issues paper. So our goal is to follow the draft ISO 600 standards section by section to get your comments. The reason I mentioned about Code Orange is at this point, next meeting we're going to provide you with a close to final draft in the September meeting. So it's important that we hear from you in terms of some specific areas that you can offer your thoughtful views, and also some of the more challenging areas whether the task force has presented to you would be helpful to understand 600, and also try to address some of the comments we heard from you in the last couple of board meetings. There were a number of comments that came in the last 8 hours. so I woke up this morning at 4 o'clock, and my apology, didn't have time to go through all the comments, but overall, I want to thank all the comments I've seen. They are very helpful, very helpful indeed. And I think Jasper and Dan will probably concur that those comments will be really good in enhancing the understanding of ISO 600. So we'll take that and I really appreciate the effort. I know there's a lot of work, so I appreciate you send us through those comments before the meeting. There were a couple of other areas. Maybe I also highlight that one of the key focus of ISO 600 is we're building on what's in there in ISO 315 and ISO 220. There was a reason that this project was delayed, is to make sure we have enough time to finalize 220 and ISO 315. So there might be certain words, certain terms or expressions in ISO 600 that people may be providing comments that asking us to reconsider some of the terms and wordings. But I just want to say that those came from 315 and 220, and we take those comments very seriously. If there are suggestions to make changes, I think as a 600 task force, we'll make sure we are not in a place to make changes to 220 or 315, but we will take your comments on board and fully consider whether there might be additional application material or explanation need to further explain and describe those actions, those wordings in 220 and 315. But it's very helpful that some of those comments came through for us to consider. So that might be a good reasons to provide additional explanation and application materials rather than go back and look at 220 and 315 because those words were already there in the those foundation standards. So I just want to highlight that. So with that, Tom, I'll just pause here to see if anybody has any questions on the outreach we have done, and also in terms of explaining the focus of a discussion today and tomorrow before we go into the standards.
Thank you, Len. Any comments on the approach for today or all the work that has been done between the March meeting and this meeting? I see no hands up, so I think people are anxious to get into the standard itself.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So before I forget, I just want to see if Jasper and Dan, do you have anything you want to add in case I missed anything?
Thank you, Len. I have nothing to add.
Okay. Okay, so Michelle, can we turn over to next slide? Okay, so this is a slide we presented to you in December. In December, we show you the key feedbacks we heard from the exposure period. And this just want to show this upfront as we prepare going to our discussion today. As you can see that there were a number of green areas. We're getting our support in terms of what we propose in the exposure draft. There were a number of areas showing yellow, and the task force with the board's input have been spending a lot of time on addressing those concerns. And there's one red area, the risk-based approach. Clearly, that was a foundation to revision of 600 and also try to align with 315. So give at least a board another fresh look in terms of the areas that we are trying to address, at least between now and approval of the standards in December. So just have that image in the back of your mind, and also it's part of your reading material. So have that in mind in terms of where we are in terms of our progression to approving the standards and some of the area which we clearly need to address. So next slide, please. So we're going to spend the first part on the introduction, and I take it that you have read issues paper, agenda paper 4. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but one of the key area is give credit to Isabel, raised it in the December meeting and subsequent input in March. In March, as you recall, the task force presented two options: the single paragraph option, the two paragraph options, and we received majority of the support. I think all the board member seems to give the thumbs up in terms of the two paragraph approach. So for what we've done since the March meeting is we revised the paragraphs to A2AA and the A2B to incorporate that wording from the March issues paper, specifically to address the single legal entity issue that Isabel had raised. So also as part of the introduction, the task force also moved paragraph A2C to paragraph 5A. This is in response to the board members' comments at the March meeting. That's the scalability considerations in paragraph A2C would be more helpful as a separate paragraph in the introduction section. There were a number of areas also being revised, particularly on A9 and A10 to address some of the professional skepticism comments we heard from the ED. So with that, we're asking the board to give us comments in terms of what we have done in the introduction section, requirement paragraph 1 to 6 and application material A1 to A10. So Tom, at this point that I'll pause here and open up for board's comments.
Okay, thank you, Len. 1 to 6 and A1 to 10. Fernando.
Hello, Len, and thanks everyone for the great work, great papers. I see good changes, very positive as well. I'm very comfortable with this piece. I just have one minor suggestion, and it's the beginning of paragraph A2AA, which reads a single entity may be organized with more than one entity. That part, it's kind of confusing for us, and I received the same input from other people. Maybe there's a way just to rephrase, even in translation. I think we're not gonna get exactly what that sentence is trying to say, and I think that confusion is one of the topics that we want to avoid here. Thanks.
Thank you, Fernando. Diane?
Thank you, Tom. And Len, first of all, I like the orange, although you look a little bit like a prisoner in jail. So I am slightly concerned about that. But overall, I like the orange. And I also think you guys did a terrific job on this document. I do have a couple minor nits and nats that I'll send along. And my one comment that I wanted to make was in application paragraph A9A. First of all, the fourth bullet, I really was pleased to see the addition of the intergroup transactions. I think that in practicality, that can be a real challenge. And so I think that is very, very helpful. The one I would ask you to think about is the one right below it, where it starts off when the group audit is subject to a tight reporting deadline. I think in actuality, probably close to most of all audits are subject to a tight reporting deadline. So I just was struggling with the application specific to group audits. I'm not sure it would be anything different than a non-group audit. And it goes on to say that, because of that tight deadline, which again, once you say the word tight deadline, it would be open to interpretation as to what that means. It leaves you with that question that you may need to have discussions, judgment and appropriately question management's assertions, and may even need to communicate with those charged with governance. And it kind of just leaves you dangling as to communicate what happens and so on. So I just ask you to revisit that bullet, because again, I don't think it's specific to a group situation. But otherwise, I was quite happy with this section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Julie.
Thanks, Tom. And hi, everyone. I have been here the last few days. You might wonder if I was here because I haven't spoken, but it feels a little odd to only speak for the first time today. But Len, congratulations on the paper and all your work. And we were one of the ones that sent through comments, apologized that they only arrived in your inbox when you woke up this morning. But, and I think what we did at this point in time was take an opportunity, Len, to really scrub through the standard. So while there's quite a number of comments in the draft we forwarded, it was really taking this time at this point in juncture to do a real scrub through and make sure we caught everything. So the number of comments is not a reflection on the quality of the work. It's just the fact that we are at this point in time and we wanted to ensure you had all of our comments at this point. So I do have a few things though that I'll raise throughout the sections that you've probably, if you've seen the comments, you've seen them, but I'll raise them here as well. The first one, Len, on this section is it's right at the end of A2A. And at the end of A2A, we say that there could be these subgroups, and these subgroups themselves might be a group audit. And I think we just need to open that up or allow for the possibility that the group auditor may decide that that's the way they structure their group audit, or they might decide that those components underneath the subgroup, they're just going to treat those as components and not deal with the subgroup. So I think we just need to open that up. And maybe it's just a bit of a hangover from a previous paragraph that was there before. My next thought is on 3A. And this maybe is something to put in your bucket of things for implementation guidance, because I see the task force has changed audit procedures to audit work. And I see that, you know, if it filters through the standard, sometimes we say audit procedure, sometimes we say audit work. And when I thought about the difference, I think where I got to was that audit work could be more broad and audit procedures was more specific, but it wasn't completely clear to me if that's what the intention was of using those two different terms. So it may not be a standard drafting point, but I think somewhere that needs to be explained for people, because they'll see both and they'll wonder what the difference is between both terms. And then just lastly, in this section, Len, A9A, happy that you've added some bullets there around professional skepticism. I guess for a couple of the bullets and the way they were worded, I wasn't entirely sure that they were challenges to professional skepticism, because, for instance, the third and fourth bullet, completely agree, those are complexity items and those things create complexity in audit, but are they truly challenges to professional skepticism, or are they just increasing the complexity? And so maybe the task force can just take another scrub through those bullets and ensure that they're worded in a way that's driving at what's creating the challenge for professional skepticism, because in some cases they felt a little bit like complexity challenges as opposed to professional skepticism challenges. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sachiko.
Thank you, Tom, and hello, everybody. First of all, I also echo that, congratulate a task force for tremendous effort. I think the draft has much improved to respond to the comment to the exposure draft, as well as the previous board meetings. And I also like orange color, although it looks like prisoner, because Tokyo is going to late night, so it's very good to have bright color on the screen to wake me up. So thank you very much. And I have one comment with regard to paragraph A to WA with regard to applicability of the standard. I really appreciate that the task force has added paragraph A to WAA, since I think it has made it clearer with the consideration when there are branches or divisions. And I think it would be better if the standard also clearly indicates that the auditor may use professional judgment to determine whether the financial statements meet definition of group financial statements, depending on the circumstances. Paragraph A to WA suggests an example case to determine whether a single legal entity is a group or not. But different jurisdictions have different forms of entities and practices. So I understand that it is difficult in some cases to capture all cases, even when a single legal entity has entities or business units that meet one of the characteristics mentioned in paragraph A to WA, which states separate location, separate management, or separate information systems. There is a case which is not very meaningful to determine as group audit. For example, for the audit of a very small supermarket with simple transaction, which has a few stores in different but close locations, it may not be reasonable to plan the audit as a group audit, since it is small and it has no separate management and no separate information system. There is no involvement of the component auditors, and also the auditor can perform procedure on all account balance centrally. In addition, when ISO 600 applies, I think the auditor's report is required to include the statements about the group audit, but I think it is a bit disproportionate that such an audit includes these statements by referring to the group in the auditor's report. And accounting systems are evolving to enable us to manage the accounting data in various ways. So I think it may be a bit realistic for the standard to clarify and draw a bright line about what exactly mean the condition of the financial information is required to be aggregated in preparing the single financial legal entity's financial statement, and therefore meet the definition of the group financial statement. So to address this issue, I suggest the standard clarify that the professional judgment may be necessary to determine whether an audit is a group audit. I understand that the intent of the revision relating to the applicability is to eliminate the use of the professional judgment, but I support the clarification of applicability. I think the standard cannot describe every case and professional judgment is needed in some case. And also with regard to scalability of ISO 600, when it applies to less complex group audit, I think in the agenda item 4B, it states that the task force plan to develop additional guidance, for example, to illustrate the scalability through implementation support material. I think it's very, very helpful. I think it needs to be clarified in the additional guidance, how to apply the standard to a group audit of a single legal entity, which is conducted without component auditors, and what will be required in this case by applying the standard. I think it would be challenging to clarify this point within the standard, but at least it needs to be clarified outside the standard. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. And I also want to acknowledge the work that has been done by the task force. I also like the orange color. I'm used to wear it often. And I used to say it was a tribute to Arnold. So I'm thinking to Arnold also today with this Dutch color. Regarding the changes that have been made in the application material, I really support what has been included in A2 big A and A2 big B. It's very important for us. It's solving the issue we identified earlier. I agree with the comment that has been raised by Fernando. I think in the first line of A2 big A, we can replace with more than one entity, which reads badly, with more than one division or business unit. And I think it will solve the understanding of this sentence. But to us, it really clarifies the issue we raised earlier. And again, I want to thank the task force for the work that has been done.
Thank you. Chun-Wei?
Thank you, Tom. And I like orange too. I think it's a very invigorating color. So thank you for that. Thanks, Lan and Jasper, Dan, and the task force for fantastic work. I think, as others have mentioned, you have been very responsive to the comments that the respondent has given us through the ED process and through the board meeting, including some of the points that I raised myself. So I want to, first of all, thank you for all the great work. I have not sent through my comments. I will. I have some editorial comments, which you will see in the offline version that I sent. And I'll pick some of the sort of more than editorial comments to raise in today's meeting. So in relation to this part, I'm comfortable with a lot of the changes that's been made. I'm supportive. I just have one point that I want to raise now, and this is relating to A9A. It's a slightly different point to Diane and Julie, though. So I'm actually quite comfortable with the added bullet points. Just wondering, just in terms of the first bullet point, and I know that this was already there in the ED, but when lined up with the other additions, which to me look more clear-cut challenges, this point, which is about the possibility of being presented with contradictory information from different sources, I think it actually provides an enhanced opportunity for group auditor to uncover material misstatements, whether due to error or fraud, especially the latter. So I do wonder if it's worth considering presenting this point separately from the others and highlighting the value, the possible value there, while emphasizing the importance of exercising professional skepticism. another related point, flipping it over and linking it to the point raised by respondents about component auditors needing to exercise professional judgment, professional skepticism as well. Perhaps in paragraph 26A, when we talk about the communication, we can require component auditors to proactively identify and flag to the group auditor what they observe at the component level that may be different from what the group auditor present to them in the group instructions and other communication. So I thought this is one tangible way to flag that possibility and to bring that ability of component auditor to exercise professional skepticism in a very tangible way. So something to consider for the task force. Thanks.
Sue?
Thank you, and thanks, Len, on the task force. I can see there's a huge amount of work that's gone into to reflect the feedback that's come from the consultation, and also, sorry, what you've had from the board. Like others, I'm probably one of the ones who has glued up your inbox overnight. So you have comments from us, and like Julie, I've also been working with some of the people who are going to have to implement this in practice. So some of the questions and suggestions are coming from a perspective of starting to think about how some of these requirements would be operationalized. I've spoken before about the involvement of a statutory auditor, and I can see that there's a lot more material in there that is starting to reflect that. I have highlighted in a few places where I think that there's possibly more to be done, and particularly in some of the less frequent situations where there is, for example, a statutory audit that has already been completed, perhaps because there was a different year end, where the group auditor may be looking to use that work, but some of the communication goals are not necessarily achieved in the same way as they're spelt out. So we've highlighted some areas in, for example, the guidance to 3B. I think looking at in relation to 4, where it's an equity investment, for example, and again, the nature of the communication may not be as straightforward. So some suggestions there. And I think also in A9B, again, the way in which the communication works in an equity investment situation or where the audit has been completed is a bit different. Thank you.
Thank you. Keo?
Hello, everyone. And Len, thanks for your hard work in the task force and your colleagues there. And many thanks to the staff which stands behind the task force. I myself, I have to say that I don't like the orange color, because as Jasper knows that the orange color is the color for the Dutch national team in soccer. And Jasper knows that there's not a really friendship between both national teams. So sorry, Len, I like you very much. You are my friend, but I don't like the color of your shirt. Okay. Very briefly, Len and the others, I'm in favor of the task force revision as discussed in section 1 of this issue paper, and believe from my view that they are in the public interest. Thanks.
Thank you. Roger.
And congratulations, Len. All I can say about the orange shirt is you really stand out on my screen, Len. So yeah, so you're the centre of attention. So like Julie says, Tom, I've really spoken. You've received our comments as you've talked about. What I really like what you've done, Len. I think you're in a very good place. I like the clarity of when this standard is now invoked. I agree with the comments around the introductory sentence of A2AA. I think that needs a little bit of tweaking. I really like what you've done on aggregation risk, so thank you, because that's given us sort of a conceptual underpinning of why you've chosen these types of issues as to seeing something just procedural. Taking that further, I would like to see aggregation risk, further taken into the assurance framework, but I'm aware we haven't updated the assurance framework for a long time. So, so that would be something to look at. But certainly the fact that this issue gives rise to a more significant aggregation risk, which is there always, does give a conceptual underpinning to the issues that you've actually identified. Like Julie, I struggled with the audit procedures and audit work, and it was sort of flagged to me where you had changed it. So that all of a sudden became highlighted. And, so we've got it there, 100 times procedures and 25 times work. And I tended to land where Julie landed too, which is, I think work is broader than the procedures, or the procedures are not related to the audit opinion, and audit work's getting extra work done there. I can see it's been used interchangeably through other standards, and I still don't know the underpinnings of those of that use. So clarity there, and I know it's not specific to this project, but clarity there as to why you've landed where you had would be useful, I think, in that particular regard. You have received some comments from CUSP. I won't keep on going through those. Jasper's already responded. Part of it is to sort of thin down a little bit of the introductory material by, for example, taking examples into application material. So they're starting to creep into the introductory material. They could easily go into application material to the introductory, but they're the types of things, which means that we're at a pretty good stage when we're getting at that particular stage. So congratulations to yourself and the task force. And I think you're in a really good spot. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Kai?
Thank you, and thank you, Len, and the task force and stuff for all the great work that's been done here and the updates that's been done to the standard. Similar to what others have raised, I like the changes and additions that has been done in the application material around paragraph 1A. So typically A to AA and A to B. As some of the comments that has been raised there might be some tweaks that needs to be done to the first sentence, as some of the others raised. But I think we're getting in a much better position and more clearly describing when this standard is applicable or not. So, thank you very much for that, and also support some of the comments that came from both Diane and Julie around A9A, whether or not all of those bullets really need to be there, and if they are needed, so to say, in the situation. So, I think in opposition to what Roger and Julie said, that they hadn't spoken yet, you probably have heard me quite a lot during the early days of the week, so you'll be happy to know that there will be quite less to hear from me today. So great work, Len, and thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Josh?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you very much for the great work for Len and the task force colleagues. And I like orange colors, but I don't have any witty comments about orange. Sorry. And I have the direction of the revision proposed by the task force is based on the analysis of the consultation results, especially including the comments from IAASB and IFIR. I support the task force direction. So highly I appreciate it. In general, based on the risk-based approach, it is consistent with the basis idea of ISA 220 that group auditors should take a leadership and conduct a top-down risk assessment. And it also provides in the introductory part, the importance of the active involvement of the component auditors. So I highly appreciate that this proposal takes into account the balance between both of auditors, and this policy should be maintained. And about the paragraph A9A, I support the task force direction to emphasize the significance of professional skepticism by providing examples of challenges to the exercise of professional skepticism in a group audit. However, in relation to fraud project, the only way to confirm whether professional skepticism has been sufficiently exercised is through documentation of what audit procedures have been performed. So the importance of documentation should be emphasized at the same time. I know that this is not an issue specific to ISO 600, as the task force mentioned. So it is necessary to collaborate not only with the professional skepticism project, but also with the fraud project. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Imran.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. When I saw the orange, Len, it reminded me of my mom, my late mom, and my parents. My mom's absolute favorite color was orange, and she and my dad regularly wore it together. So it's really lovely to see that. And she used to say it makes her happy because Frank Sinatra used to say that orange was his favorite color as well. But she used to say it was his happiest color. So what I've learned from the earlier comments this morning is that I have not studied the standard as well as other colleagues on the board have. And this has given me cause to pause and go back and see what it is I've missed. But in the meantime, I thought I'll share my impressions. I've only sent brief advanced comments, and I certainly don't have a mountain of other comments to send you. So you can take my comments as they are. I really liked what I had seen in this initial section, and so really wanted to just support how I saw A2AA and A2B improve, and also how I saw the application material on professional skepticism improve, and had nothing constructive to offer you in relation to it other than I liked it. What I felt may lose context in the passage of time was Isabel's metaphor of the cafe in Paris. And unless you were in the board in 2020 and 2021, and you remember how it felt like to have received that description, it's easy to forget why we have such an elaborate description in A2AA and A2B. But I think that in the normal course of the basis of conclusions, then the basis of conclusions will provide the context to what indeed is going on here and what the board is trying to communicate in that area. I have, like I promised, nothing more to say in this area. Really, thank you for the direction that the task force has taken here.
Okay, I think that's the last of the hands. We got actually nearly everyone's wasn't a member of the task force spoke. It's very encouraging to hear that there's support for the direction that the task force has moved, and that the task force has been responsive to board comments. As always, there's a number of helpful suggestions to continue to refine further, but I'm encouraged that we're on the right track, Glenn.
Yes, Tom, thank you. I think that summarized the positive support from the board members. There's some areas, I think A9A is one paragraph that several board members have suggestions to make further changes. So we'll take that on board. And Isabel and Fernando, your suggestions on wording, just let you know, the task force has already started coming out with suggestions already, as you spoke. There's one area I thought maybe we highlight is Sashiko's comments about A2AA. In the ITC, in the ED, and also the board discussion we heard is people want bright line guidance, the entry point and the applicability of ISO 600. So I also appreciate that Sashiko has made these comments several times before about allowing auditor to exercise professional judgment in terms of the applicability of ISO 600. So Shishi and I also spoke several times offline in the last 6 to 9 months on this issue. But I think this is one area we probably need a clear direction from the board. Is the direction we heard from the board from December, March is clear bright line guidance in terms of when you're in 600, when you are not in 600. But we also hearing a good argument from Sashiko in December, in March as well. So perhaps this is the one area for this introduction section. We would like some clear direction from the board. Are you happy with what we have in A2AA versus Sashiko's further suggestion is some language in that allowing professional judgment?
Any reaction to Len's request?
Ask that Len.
I'm sorry. You want?
Could I ask that Len repeat that?
I can't. We couldn't hear you, Imran. You were cutting.
I'm sorry for that. Yes, I was also requesting whether Len could please repeat that proposal.
Okay, Len, could you repeat the option that you led?
Okay, the option one is what the task force, based on the feedback from the ED common peer process, also boards that previous discussion on this topic is to have a bright line in terms of the how you get scope into 600, how you apply 600 versus allowing for professional judgment, as Sachiko had articulated several times before.
Julie?
Yeah, Tom, I just wanted to come in and support where the task force has landed on this, Len. I understand there's been some wording suggestions to A2 AA, but I'm fine with the concept.
Okay, Diane?
I agree with Julie. I like the wording in A2 AA, and I think also the bright line is important for consistency. And so I'm supportive of what you've got here. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger?
We've continually pushed for clarity. Bright line is where we would prefer. Thank you.
I think you get a sense people are not into. I think judgment is to some extent applied here, but I think you have support from the majority of the board. Sachiko?
Thank you, Tom. And I just want to say thank you very much for, very, very thoughtful consideration to the task force and board. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you. Sachiko, based upon what you just said, I don't think this would ever arise to a fatal flaw for you in final consideration.
No.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to the next section.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Just a couple other things before I move on is the couple comments about equity investees and audits for other purposes. I think Sue, you raised that. I think we'll come up to that later on in the discussion. So we'll address that as we move along. And lastly, just want to say that all the comments we received are very good comments. So Julie, your comments about the number of comments you're sending, we are very happy to receive that. I think really helpful comments in terms of, at least a fresh look at what we have done, and those suggestions and comments were very good. Okay, moving on to the next section is on the objectives and definitions. I just make sure I have the right slides. Okay, that's the right slides. So this deal with the requirements in paragraph 8 and paragraph 9 and 10, application material A11 to A16B. And just quickly, before we open up for input, is we explained that in the agenda item 4A, that the paper shows you all the changes and reason for that. There were no changes to objective. I think we heard that some people want us to change the term auditor to group auditor in the objective. But we feel that in all the ISAs in the objective, we refer to auditor, and also this is consistent with the intent of ISA 220. So we didn't make change on that. In terms of, there was this one particular paragraph on joint audit, paragraph A15A. Joint audit we had discussed before. That was addressed in ISA 220. But from the last board meeting, there were a number of board members feel that joint audit should be emphasizing in ISA 600. So we included that in this draft. So with that, Tom, we will be happy to hear the comments from the board on objectives and definition section.
Okay, on objectives and definition. Imran.
Yes, thank you. So you would know that the interest I've had in how the ISO 600 project was going to deal with the topic of joint audits. And so I was very pleased to see how in the application material to the definition J, so 9J, we have an extensive description of this relationship between joint auditors. If I had to make a wish here, my wish would be that the first part of A15A really is part of the definition of group engagement partner and is not in the nature of application material. So maybe the task force wants to reflect on that. I appreciate that you may decide against it in the long term, but I thought that technically speaking, the first half of the application material is actually part of the definition and not part of application material. Happy to see this here. I think this is one of those topics that we're canvassing inputs on as we're doing our survey on the work program, and having it here places a foundation for further work that our board can do. Nothing else in this area, Len. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks, Tom. And Len, this is a comment that has some history, and I know we've talked about the definition of component management before, and so there's that definition, and I take that as already deliberated, but in A15 we talk about component management again, and we were trying to explain who those people might be, and I think this is a really practical implementation point that I think is going to come up, which is components will sometimes be identified by the auditor as opposed to naturally falling into a structure that management might have created. And so I think there could be some struggle still with who component management is. And we've got that paragraph in A15, which is trying to explain that there may be an aggregation of business units or other entities that combine together to create a component. But I do think it maybe gives the impression that there might not be component management in some cases. I think we just need to maybe add a sentence or something to reflect the fact that it could very well be that group management is component management. And I think it's just making sure that, and the reason why I'm bringing it up is because later in the standard, there are things that involve component management, like rep letters and other communications. And I think we just need to be sure we're clear that component management has to be defined by the team, not defined. Component management has to be understood by the team in order to execute on the requirements in 600. So I'm wondering if just a little bit more in A15 would help with that point. That was it.
Thank you. Diane?
Thank you, Tom. And my comment is also relative to joint audits. And I actually agree with Imran's recommendation. I actually think it's an eloquent solution if you take the first part of the sentence and move it over to a definition. And the reason I feel that way is this is kind of the first time that you hear about joint audits, and it's kind of dangling in here the way it is, because you make the affirmative statement that the ISA does not necessarily deal with the relationship, but there's a whole host of issues when you've got joint auditors involved and a whole cast of considerations that you would need to go through. So I think maybe a tidy way and clarifying way to deal with that is, as Imran suggested, moving the first part over to the definition, and then you kind of cut it off from there and you say, yep, this is what we're including in the definition, but then you're not opening yourself up to having to explain what are joint audits, what are all the considerations, how are they going to interact with one another. So I like his suggestion. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel?
Yes, thank you. My point relates also to A15 big A on joint audit. Very happy to see this paragraph that was already in extant ISA 600 in the application material of the definition, to see it come back, because we really need it here. Happy also with the wording and the content of this paragraph. really we should be careful not to change or add anything, because I think at the time of the last revision of ISA 600, all the words were weighted and they are at the right place and they convey the right meaning. So really, we don't want to change any word in this paragraph. Happy with the suggestion of Imran, also supported by Diane, to cut it in two and have a part of it in the definition. So thank you for that. And also on the definitions themselves, we have requests, continuous requests to see a definition of group engagement team. So I know we raised it several times already. We had the feedback that it was not necessary, that it was quite obvious, which I agree to. But a lot of people reading the standard and not familiar with it are searching a definition of group engagement team because they see a definition of group auditor, and group engagement team is not the same as group auditor, and they want to have a clear mind on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger.
Yeah, Len, I praised you before about the aggregation risk and the use of it. I can't say I like the definition very much, though. You've taken it to a probability. I would leave it as a risk, and I like the description, but you're certainly taking it to a level here of where the auditor has to do something. So there's a clear misstatement. So it's not a definition necessarily of aggregation risk. My second comment is this is the first example of where there's probably a change from audit procedures to audit work, and it would be useful just to hear, because it does go through, it permeates through the document, it would be useful to hear the justification, and then how do we make it clear to everybody, or how do you intend to make it clear to everybody as to the way you're drawing a distinction about them, because at the moment I can't see that it's clear. So they'd be my two comments. Thank you.
Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Len, fabulous job, really responsive, and I really like the direction we're going here. Apologies, I didn't get you anything to read for 4 o'clock in the morning, but you will have something today, and the comments will be very similar to what you heard. I didn't pile on in the first discussion because I agree in particular with the comments that were made on A9 and other comments. In this area, I was happy to see the discussion A15A on joint auditors. And I hadn't actually even thought about moving it into the requirements, but I wanted to echo that I really like that idea that Diane and Imran mentioned, and that was then. And my other point, or something that I've wrestled with, is: do we really need the definition of the group engagement team? I go back and forth on that, but hearing it from Isabel, perhaps it is something that we should consider in the definitions. And I don't think it's a lot of heavy lifting to work it into the rest of the standard. Thank you.
Thank you. So Len, by my tabulation, that you have some suggestions about joint audits and whether that first sentence could be part of the definition. Some comments on A15, some questions of whether group engagement team should be a defined term. Roger raised the question about aggregation risk, and some clarification about the term audit work and its consistency relative to audit procedures throughout. So those were the things that I picked up in this section.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for that summary. Just want to address the definition, or that A15A people's suggestions about having that first part sentencing definition. I think this is the area that the task force needs to spend some time. Also, probably need to involve Willie as well, because in our body of auditing literature, we don't really define joint audit. Where that should be defined, and whether that's is a 600 issue, is a border issue. I know we, in our work plan we had identified joint audit is one of the area we're potentially looking at. So you know, probably need to give it more some thoughts and also input from the staff on this. So but we hear the support from Aaron and from Diane, from others, that there's a support for that. But we need to have more thoughts on in those areas. The work versus audit procedure. Sorry, I didn't address that in the first part of this discussion. I think Julie and Roger, I think you're right. Audit work needs to be something broader. Maybe in the next draft we should think about explain that better. Also, we're also conscious about the work that's being done in ISA 500 as well, looking at defining audit procedure. When we look at the current ISA 500, how they describe audit procedure seems to be from gathering audit evidence. But we know that you know, a lot of work are done in addition to just audit procedure in obtaining audit evidence. So we'll go back and take a look in terms of how we describe work versus procedure in our task force meeting. And Roger, thank you for your comments on the aggregation risk. I think we spend a lot of time, and also appreciate you giving us a lot of offline comments and separate discussion in that. We know that's your important topic. So you know, whether we try to deal with that here or elsewhere, we'll have another discussion at task force. But we just want to be responsive to the comment we heard from you today. With that, unless I missed any other things, perhaps maybe on the joint audit point, maybe we'll come back. We probably need a separate discussion with the staff after that. And Tom, with that, perhaps we can move to the next section.
Okay, please do.
Okay, so on the slides, we are talking about the leadership and responsibility, acceptance, and continuance. So this is related to paragraph requirement 12, 13, and to 17, and application material 819, 820, 821 to 833. Just quickly, just talk about what we have done. We make some changes in paragraph 12 to link it better to ISA 220. And on paragraph, the application material 829, you know, that section about overcome restrictions to access people information may not be appropriate. They may not provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So we add some the language in there and try to address when group auditors addressing sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And it's a matter of professional judgment. Paragraph 829A, some respondents talk about it was not clear that regarding publicly available information. So we try to clarify that in some language in that area. So with that, I open up for board's comments.
Imran.
Yes, thank you very much. My daughter just got back from school and she looked over my shoulder and she asked, why is everybody wearing orange? And then she says, Dad, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how serious is this meeting? So please help me with an answer. So thanks for that intro. I have 2 points of clarification, please. On the bit that has been added to A19A, I appreciate we must have added it for an important reason. The last sentence of it, though, does not yet mean anything to me. So I wonder if the task force could have a look at what it is that we were trying to communicate at the end of A19A. I don't not agree with that. I just I'm not sure what it means. And perhaps with some words there, it may be a little bit clearer. I want to also just express my support for A29A. I understand that this has been long awaited. There was a lot of interest in this. I think you referenced it now in your remarks. So I want to support what the task force has come up with in A29A. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Next, Sachika.
Oh, thank you, Tom. I have two comments regarding this section. First one is paragraph 12. I understand the task force attempt to strengthen the linkage to paragraph 13 of ISA 220. But when I look at the paragraph in 220, the sentence added is, I think, almost an excerpt from paragraph 13 of ISA 220. And it seems we have creating a repetitive requirements in 220 and 600. So rather than repeating the requirement, I think we can say in paragraph 12 to say, in applying 220 to take over responsibility for managing and achieving quality on the group audit engagement, the group engagement partner shall be sufficiently and appropriately involved. And we can continue the original sentence. And I have also similar angle comment on the first two sentences of paragraph A19, big A. These are almost exact from paragraph A28 or ISA 220. And I think they are not so specific to the group audit. So I suggest deleting the first two sentences and retaining the last two sentences in paragraph A19, big A. And my next comment is paragraph A29. Paragraph A29 became a lengthy due to, I think, repeating the same examples to overcome restrictions on access to audit documentation in different scenarios. I think it will be easier to read and understand if the description is more condensed by combining the first and third bullets. I think we can do that without eliminating the sentence. I have already sent you my wording suggestion offline, so perhaps you can take a look at that. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachika. Julie.
Thanks, Tom. And on paragraph 12, I had the identical comment that Sachiko just raised. And it pops up a couple more times, so I won't repeat it, Len, and we sent this in our offline comments to you, but there are a few places where we seem to have created a repetitive requirement in 600 that exists in other standards. And so I think it's simply rewording those just to say is required to, or something along those lines, so we don't repeat them again in 600. Paragraph 13, understand this paragraph pertains to acceptance and continuance, but without any words in paragraph 13, I don't get to that point of understanding. It's under the heading, but I think if you take the heading away, it doesn't have context for what that requirement is meant to be. So I think we need something, I think we need a little lead in there to explain that this is with respect to acceptance and continuance. Otherwise, it sort of just hangs out there on its own. When I got to 16 and 17, I understand you've separated restrictions that are outside the control of group management and then within control of group management, which is fine, but the application material, particularly A27 to 32, sort of crosses over between the two. And so I think we, well, maybe 16 and 17 could be one requirement, but if you want to keep them as two requirements, which I'm not opposed to, I think the application material just needs a scrub through to make sure it's consistent with which requirement it's lining up with, because right now there's a little bit of back and forth between the two. And then on A29A, a little bit challenged with this one. I think I completely support the fact that the task force needed to address the respondents' issues when you have an equity method investment in a group audit. So no problem with that. You've tackled it. You're trying to tackle it here. I do get a little bit concerned about what we're saying here, because I think what we're saying is that you have an equity method, you have a component, therefore, and you have restricted access. And these are the bullets that we consider to be sufficient appropriate audit evidence. But if they're appropriate in that context, aren't they appropriate if you do have access? I'm just trying to understand what we're saying here, because if it's sufficient on one hand, it should be sufficient on the other hand. And so I'm a little bit concerned that we're running that risk here about how we deal. What we're saying is sufficient appropriate audit evidence for a component that's an equity method investment. And maybe the task force just needs to take another look through this and make sure that we're happy with what we have here and saying that's sufficient, because I don't think it can be sufficient in one case and not sufficient in another case. That was it. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to start with A29A actually, because it follows straight on from Julie, and I was comfortable with that. I think 15 and 16 are still areas where equity accounted investments are a challenge. But actually, maybe in response to Julie's point, perhaps the difference between any other kind of component is that management don't have the authority to get this information. So this is all that's available. So maybe something like that could help the description there. The other point I got was on 14, which it talks about the engagement partner considering the possible effects on the group audit. The application material is really talking about the effects on the group audit opinion. And I wonder whether there's an opportunity there, assuming that the group audit is what we're looking at, to align more with 330, in particular, paragraph 27, which is then reflecting the other steps that might be taken before you get to the impact on the group audit opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Chun-Wei?
Thank you. I have a few comments and quite similar to some of the comments that have been raised. So the first one is on A19A. I think as Imran and Sachiko mentioned, I was reading it and just wondering, how does this firm culture demonstrating commitment to quality apply in a scenario whereby you have component auditors and they may be sort of spread out and not in the same firm. So I thought a bit of it is covered in paragraph 12 itself, where we talk about sufficiently and appropriately involved, and then A20 that talks about communication, direction, supervision, and review. But I wonder if there's more that we can perhaps explain here, or maybe even in a new paragraph that follows. For example, leading by example in the various interactions with component auditors, because otherwise this just looks like it applies only where all the members are in one firm. So something to think about for A19A. A25, the paragraph after the bullet, the inability to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to be evaluated against 705. I think this bit is actually covered more completely, more comprehensively in the requirement itself, where we have paragraph 16, 17, and 17A. So maybe we actually don't need this part because you may actually create some confusion about what this exactly entails. Because when they get to the requirement 16, 17, 17A, they actually get a little, quite a bit more guidance there. My last comment is on A29A as well, and it's on the 3 bullets. So my initial comment was to, in the 3rd bullet where we talk about the representation that you hold in the non-controlled entity, I think they will be expected to have access to financial and other information that are relevant to the audit, which is actually part of first bullet. So I wanted to suggest that we put before discussion with them, in addition to assessing financial and other information available to them in their roles or something along that line. But I think Sachiko is suggesting that you just combine the first and the third bullet, which I think will work as well. So I want to support that. Thanks.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. Just two quick comments. As it relates to 820, I was one, as it relates to the part about the network, I read it a few times and I was wondering whether or not the implication was, the network may facilitate communication, but somehow I think we should put in, it doesn't let the group auditor off the hook. I kind of stepped away and said, okay, that makes it easy, but maybe it needs to be clear that the group auditor is responsible regardless. And then I also have similar comments on 829. And I was, sorry, there's a lot to scroll through here. Whether or not maybe we want to separate the non-controlling interest out and just make it clear, because there are certainly different, I think Julie said you have different ability, management has a different ability to get information as it relates to components they control versus those that they don't. So I like the last suggestion. I think Chun-Li had one to clarify it, or just consider it, having it be separate. Thanks.
Again, tend to be encouraged with the direction we're heading. A number of helpful suggestions, including about removing potentially repetitive requirements, some clarity around 829 and 819A. But I think the task force can consider all of these comments. It doesn't seem like anything that's fundamentally different from a directional standpoint for the task force. Is that your assessment, Len?
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. I just want to address the repetitive language in paragraph 12. This came from the regulatory communities and members of monitoring group that they want more clear, more emphasis in the direction, in the leadership responsibility of the engagement partner. That's the reason, we just not just using implying ISO 220. So we add words there from 220 to make sure that we are responsive to the regulatory and monitoring group comments. But I think Julie, Sachiko, and others mentioned about whether that needs to be in 600. I think the task force is open to those suggestions. I think my task force member already start thinking about how to reduce all those languages, but at the same time, make sure we are responsive to the regulatory comments in paragraph 12 on those leadership quality, culture, behavior, and we'll take a look. Okay, so just want to explain to you why the changes were there in the current draft. There were a lot of similar comments on 819, 829, 829A, equity, access, restriction. Those are very helpful, and some of those comments we already see them coming through in the offline comments. So we'll address them. Lastly, my apology that I did not address the group engagement team, group auditor discussion in the previous discussion. So just hold that thought. I'll come back at the end of the day if we have time, or maybe I'll talk about it tomorrow. But my apology for skipping that. I did have some response on the group engagement team, group auditor issue that was raised in the previous discussion. So with that, Tom, I just want to check with you whether this is a good place for a break, or do we want to continue?
We'll take a break. We'll reconvene at 20 minutes to the hour, 8:40 my time. So I hope we'll see you in 13 minutes. Speak to you soon. We'll be starting in a couple minutes. Okay, could people start rejoining? A few more seconds. Okay, let's get back. Okay, Len, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll continue. Before that, I just want to say that over the break, I went back and looked at some of the offline comments I received in the last a few hours, and I really appreciate those comments, and also want to thank the board for bringing those fundamental, significant comments at the meeting so far, and not overly burdened with the editorial. So I appreciate the focus that the board member has been exercising their judgment in making those comments to the task force. So with that, next section is paragraph 17A on the overall group audit strategy and group audit plan. I think this is the area, if you can remember, at the beginning of the presentation, there was a heat map, and that single red box, I think that single red box starts right here. What we're going to talk about in the next 4 or 5 topics are directly involved in related to the risk assessment. And from the agenda paper 4, the issues paper pretty much summarize the task force have done so far in terms of the draft you're reacting. So I'm not going to go through them. I want to make sure we have enough time for board's input and discussion. But overall, we heard clear direction from the respondents and as well as the board that we need to have develop a group audit strategy and group audit plan in this standard. So that came to us in December. In March, we provided the first draft, and we received a lot of good comments in the March meeting, and we try to address them in the current draft. So this is probably the area that hopefully that you can give us precise, concise comments and clear direction in terms of what we have done so far that meets your concern. So with that, Tom, I will turn over to the board for input.
I think you used the word concise there, and I have to ask people, we're running slightly behind where we need to be to get through all the material. So if you're agreeing, I don't want to preempt people from making their comments, but if you're agreeing with someone, just please state you're agreeing with someone, and we'll take that. We'll note that for the record, but you don't need to repeat agreement in full. Okay, we're going to take comments on paragraphs 17A and A33A through I. Now, shall we?
Thanks. I'll be brief. So very supportive of many of the additions and edits here. Just two smaller comments. One is on A33E. I think it looks a little bit detached from the rest. So maybe we can just remove A33E and build a part on engagement continuance process to A33B and the part on engagement acceptance process to A33C. So I think that will look a little bit more integrated. Second comment on A33F, the first bullet. I think there's a helpful clarification. There is a potential risk, though, that some group auditor may focus exclusively on the size and seek to achieve coverage with limited regard to the other considerations. So maybe it's worth providing an example or two to expand on and provide guidance on the qualitative or nature part of the consideration. That'll be all. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Sure.
Thanks. I have a point on A33I, which is talking about the involvement of component auditors in planning the audit. And I think just some practical feedback that there may still be confidentiality issues there that I think could perhaps be reflected in the drafting, just so that there may need to be different ways of involving and briefing component auditors. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Imran?
Yes, thank you. Then I found that the application material to 17A, particularly the application material that spoke to the continual and iterative nature of the process, was essential. I thought that it was covered in the issues paper as well, but when one reads 17A alone, recognizing that that is the only requirement, don't we run the risk of having that as the only deliverable on the audit file? Just the one-off strategy and group audit plan established at the conception or at the beginning of the audit, because there's no need to update it embedded within the requirement. And in reality, that is a likely outcome, that it's going to have to be updated during the audit. So, so I'm looking to understand, and I think we may have some example of elsewhere about how the iterative nature gets built into the requirement. The second one, and this is really a practical question for those experts in your task force with the experience in group audits. I haven't done one for a few years, but I thought that the inputs that A33C described, in my experience, were simply not enough. I couldn't understand how in an initial group engagement, one could get by with developing the strategy simply with those three inputs. I thought it would need, my experience has been that we need substantially more than that to be able to deliver it. Thank you, Len.
Okay. Len, turn back to you to respond. I think Imran raises the substantive point in terms of the delineation between requirements and application material.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Just quickly address Cheng-Wei and Sue. Those are helpful suggestions. We'll go back and take a look at a task force. On Enron's 17A, from my perspective, that came from we're writing requirement based on the foundational standards. So one of the things is ISO 300 and ISO 330. So we're building special considerations for in the ISO 600 in a group audit situation. So that's why you see extended application materials in the A33 series. There's a lot of paragraphs in A33. If you look at specifically paragraph 10 of 330, that's exactly what we're trying to deal with in paragraph 17A. That's a requirement for all the audits, not just group audits. So that principle is there, and the task force at least spent a lot of time discussing whether there should be more, but in the spirit of linking to those code requirements in other standards, we feel that since there's an overall requirement already, so the better place to address them is through surfacing those special considerations in the application material. So that's an approach that that the task force have taken. So we will take that comment. I think we know that's a substantial comments are raised by you. So perhaps it might help you if we spend some time as a task force in terms of maybe give more thought and then go back to 300 and 330. And also try to get more input in terms of are there any other things that specifically needs to be a requirement in 600? We can deal with that. And also one of the things that the task force really start to talk about is looking at some additional consideration in terms of try to be consistent, at least in terms of applying paragraph 10 of 300 in looking at some of the alternatives that hopefully can address your concerns. So we already start thinking about that comments already as you raise them. So maybe give us some time to give you more thoughts.
Len, is it safe to say that when you guys are considering this, it's in the context of what is needed in terms of it being a special consideration standard? I think that's the big lens that you're applying throughout.
Right, exactly. I think that was very clear from ITC, from a lot of comments from the regulator, is that people are not reading other standards. So the more you add into 600 is actually you're actually not changing behavior, because in some of the inspection findings that the inspectors has found that people just has this laser focus that 600 is going to be probably the only place you look for guidance on 600. It's important to link that to other standards. So it requires the auditor to fully understand what's in paragraph 10 of 300 and related paragraphs in ISA 330 to arrive at how you should develop your plan and strategy, because all the material, all the concepts are in those standards. So we've been very conscious in terms of try to be disciplined, try to address those comments in our discussion at the task force.
Okay, Imran?
Yes, thank you. So I think we're on the same page then, because the way I understand 17A is the genesis post the ED of the task group's response to paragraphs 8 and 9 of 300. And that's right. I think, though, that just has one step further to go, and that is, having responded to 8 and 9 in 300, we need to also respond to 10 in 300, because that goes together. And that's just telling the whole story. I think the task force has gotten there in response to the respondent's comment. There's just a little bit left, and that's what sits in paragraph 10 that you just referenced. And that will close the gap completely. Thank you.
Yeah, Aaron, I think that's helpful. You mentioned that. So we as a task force will definitely take that on board, and how we can link that better. Maybe there's something that we can do to enforce that.
Okay, great. I'm glad we understand. Okay, any other points on 17A? Okay, we could move on.
Okay, thank you for those comments. And the next section is requirement paragraph 18 to 23A and application materials A34 to A52J. So this is the area in terms of consideration when when component auditors are involved in the group audit. So there was some changes. Again, those are reflected in the issues paper, and also for the interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see that paragraph 18, paragraph 19, 21, those were specifically try to address comments we heard from the board's discussion in March. So hopefully that what we have in there, address your concerns and comments, but I'll be happy to take comments in terms of that areas that might still need further improvement. So with that, Tom, maybe you can hear board's input on those paragraphs.
Okay, 18 through 23A with accompanying application material. Kai?
Thanks, Tom. Then I'm not sure whether my comment is in the right place now, but I will try it. I agree very much with the summary of the respondents' comments on using the work of an audit performed for other purpose. That's my issue. Furthermore, given the importance of the statutory audits in the European Union, I very much support including in the application material the words as proposed by the task force to use audit evidence from an audit performed for another purpose, which I believe to be in the public interest. Considerations may be given to augmenting these words by stating that the group auditors nevertheless required to meet the requirements of ISA 600, including the relation to direction, supervision, and review of the work of the component auditor. Len, I hope it helps you. Thanks.
Okay, Kai, you asked about whether it's the right time. I think we'll note this issue and come back to it tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
That was the reason why I was not sure whether it's the right place, but
yeah, we'll take that on. We're not going to forget it.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Okay, Julie.
Thanks, Tom. Len, I wonder in paragraph 18 if we have a little bit of a technical challenge with that paragraph, because it refers to a determination you've made in paragraph 12, but I actually don't think there's a determination in paragraph 12. So something to look at there. And I guess holistically, I'm wondering what paragraph 18 is actually telling me to do, because you've already made when you're accepting the engagement, you've already determined that you are going to be sufficiently involved. So it's almost a duplicate here saying, now tell me again that you're going to be able to be sufficiently involved. So I think 18 maybe just needs another look for those two parts to it that are a bit of a challenge for me. In A40B, this is the place where we start to talk about, ensuring that your component auditors or people within your team have sufficient competence and capability, sufficient time. And at the very end of A40B, we refer to a confirmation that's talked about in paragraph 19. But I'm wondering if the task force felt that would be sufficient at that point to only obtain a confirmation about competence and capabilities and time. I think there would need to be more than just a confirmation back from the component auditor, let's say, that covers that. So I think that could be a really important piece of evidence, but I think there would need to be more than just a confirmation, sort of a self-assessment back from the component auditor, I'll call it, about those key aspects that they need to confirm back. And then in 23A, sorry, I'm just scrolling here to get to 23A. 23A, at the very end of the requirement, it talks about the last sentence, these communications shall take place at appropriate points in time throughout the group audit, agree, and reflect the component auditor's involvement in various phases of the group audit. I wasn't completely sure what that meant. I think it means that it would reflect the times when the component auditor is involved in the group audit, and therefore you need to sort of figure out what the appropriate timing is for those communications. But maybe you could just take a look at that as a task force and make sure that's clear what we mean by those words at the end of 23A. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sachika?
Thank you. I have a comment on paragraph 839. Last two sentences are added to describe the group auditor's responsibility when the firm's financial and operational priority place constraint. But it is not clear to me what action the group engagement partner can take in these circumstances. I think it would be helpful to refer to paragraph 27 of ISA 220, which requires the engagement partner to take appropriate action, including communicating with appropriate individuals about the need to assign or make available additional alternative resources to the engagement when the resources assigned or made available are insufficient or inappropriate. In addition, by adding these last two sentences, for me, paragraph A39 seems to be sort of out of place because paragraph 20 talks about the understanding of and confirmation from the component auditor about relevant ethical requirement. On the other hand, paragraph A39 now talks about fee for group audit and the quality of the group audit more broadly. So I think we can move paragraph A39 as an application material to other requirements, perhaps acceptance and continuance or resources, and refers to paragraph A39A, which links to the provisions in the ethical requirement relating to the fee. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Diane.
Thanks, Tom. A couple comments on A35A. I struggled a bit with it for a couple reasons. One, the second sentence talks about when the component auditor is unable to cooperate as a result of laws and regs. So it just leads to a natural question, what happens if they can't cooperate because of other reasons? And we don't address that. And then at the end of that paragraph, it talks about if this happens where the component auditor can't execute and the group auditor has to step in. I think it's just raising some questions about, is that practical? How would that operate? Does that then raise questions about the original group scoping if the group auditor could have done the work themselves? And so I stumbled a bit with that paragraph in totality. So maybe if you could take a look at that. And then my other comment is in A39, and it's the example. I think the example that's provided is bringing into this discussion the firm's financial and operational priorities. And I just didn't think that that was appropriate, quite frankly, to be an example as part of the standard. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue?
Thank you. I had the same comment as Diane on A39. It felt to me that example was an assignment that should have failed the acceptance under ISQM1 in any event. On A47, or it's really in the application material to 22, this is an area where I felt there could be a little bit more consideration of the implications of equity investments and the fact that there may not be the relationship to require the component auditor to provide information, or maybe not the access. So I think I've highlighted it on A47, but it's in that piece supporting 22. And then in A52B, it's talking about the clarity of the instructions, particularly if the component auditors from another firm. We've made some suggestions there because I think it implies that the clarity isn't important, or it could imply that clarity isn't important in any communication, and I think it is. I think there's also some material from ISQM1 when we were looking at dealing with firms from network firms or non-network firms, and some language there that can be picked up. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy?
Thanks, Tom. I echo Sue's concern, or I have the same concern when as it relates to network firms and non-network firms. So I have some observations I'll send in different areas. And I won't repeat the comments that Diane and Sachiko made on 39 and 39A, but I have the same observations. The new add to A39 seems out of place and is not necessarily specific only to group audits. Thanks.
Imran?
To react, if I may, to the conversation that has taken place about A39 and A39A. As I recall, the original part of A39 has been in here for a while, and something that at the project proposal stage, I recognized and raised this as a public interest issue, and one that is at the source of root cause analysis when inspection teams help practitioners get to the root of matters. If there is some tailoring that needs to be happened to the language that has since been added by the task force, I'd appreciate that, but I certainly would be very disappointed if there's a consideration that those additions should be totally deleted. I've been consistent in expressing why this is a significant public interest issue, speak to component auditors, and this is their number one gripe. We do not give enough resources to do the work.
Yeah, I think, Imran, my read of at least the task force's inclusion of this point is precisely the reasons you were stating, or responsive to issues along those lines. So removal could be a point of concern for some, but it may be useful to get the task force reaction of maybe it's an issue of further refinement in order for us to be responsive to the public interest challenge, rather than seen as a binary, this or nothing. Len, I think this is the biggest issue that we face in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Aaron, for coming in. And you know, my involvement of this project from day one is having a conversation with Aaron 3 years ago was that's a comment that Aaron has raised to me from the very beginning. So Aaron, thank you for continuing to raise that point. And although in some of our outreach dealing with the regulators, they didn't very specifically mention this topic, but there's a implicit message about this is the area of the focus from regulators. So we take on board you know, Aaron's comments in the past, and continue to raise those comments. Also, based on our recent engagement with the regulatory community, that implicit message in those areas. So we feel that this is a significant public interest comments we need to address in the standards. It has gone through a number of discussion at task force level, including the specific reference to ISQ1. We think that it's not just on the engagement team, but also, you know, from a firm perspective, in terms of you know, to achieve high quality audits, you know, sufficient resources. Some of the you know, business and operational considerations should never impact audit quality. So we bring that into what you see today. So that just bring some of the flavor in terms of task force thinking and discussions we had. But Aaron, thank you for raising that. And I know we do hear from the discussion so far. Some people feel A39 is out of place, but at least task force view has been addressing public interest comments. So Tom, that's the position that the task force has taken. But based on that explanation, also Aaron's additional explanation, want to see if any other comments from other board members or board member haven't responded, or other alternatives we can address that would be helpful to hear those as well.
mine. Went to the next page. Imran and then Lynn.
Thank you, Tom. You used the word refinement, and I think maybe that's where the answer lies here. And I'd be open to refinement and suggestions in that area. Thank you.
The other thing it just occurred today, we just gave some historical context of the legacy of this discussion. Some of the board members who joined probably responded here had it been part of that history, and the context was useful. And I think they may be willing to participate in that refinement process with us as well. Lynn.
I strongly support Imran's position that this should stay, and I'm obviously open to refinement, but definitely not deletion. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Yeah, and maybe I'll offer a suggestion for consideration. Maybe there's a way that we could adjust it to have a sort of lead-in that says, in accordance with ISQM 1, firms can't let financial priorities override quality. Something that links us back to ISQM. I am sensitive and I appreciate folks' concerns, but at the same time, we have a standard out there that talks about acceptance and continuance and talks about sufficient resources and the ability to actually execute the audit. So I would just think about maybe linking it back to the standard that we're all required to comply by.
Okay, that's a suggestion the task force could consider. Julie?
Basically what Diane just said, Tom. I don't have a fundamental issue with the concept. I think the words that follow after, for example, are sort of imply that there's an inappropriate or non-compliance with other professional standards, which troubled me. But if we could get to something like Diane just described, that would be fine with me.
Great. So we're in the path of refinement right now. I think that it's best, rather than do a lot of drafting here on the fly, is to leave it to the task force. They got some direction on this. Are you fine with that, Len?
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. ISQM 1, ISO 220. I think Sashiko suggested, some of this in terms of how to address 839 is also helpful. So task force will go back and look at ISQM 1, ISO 220 languages to in terms of refinement. So very, very good discussion input. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, we need to keep moving.
Keep going.
Right. You told me we want to get through paragraph requirement 44 today.
Right.
You're gonna have to pick it up.
Okay, so next section is on the understanding of the group. So those are paragraph requirement 24 to 26A, application material A53 to A72, and again, most of the changes there, paragraph 24, 26, A65A, all those were try to respond to board's comments from March and also respondents in the ED. So rather than going through them in details, I think people have read them in the issues paper. And Tom, I would turn over to the board for input.
Okay, 24 to 26A. Understanding the group.
Thank you. I have a comment on paragraph 26 small a and 26 double A on small a. I strongly support task force's proposal to add the description of paragraph 26 double A small a as a matter communicated from component auditor to the group auditor. I think this is a very good addition to respond to the comment around enhancement is necessary about a component auditor's responsibility. But I think this is also important from the view, on the other hand, the same description has been removed from paragraph 26 small a. And since two-way communication is very important to achieve a high quality group audit, I think perhaps we could keep in paragraph 26 small a as well as a communication from the group auditor to the component auditor in addition to paragraph 26, AA, small a, as a communication from the component auditor to the group auditor. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Chun-Wei.
Thank you. Now, I have some editorial comments about using, about saying the group or a group, and then extent to which are similar, similar to what, and so on. So those you will see in the offline comment. I'll raise two things here. First is on A56, the first bullet point. I think one key concern about complex group structure is that the substance of the transactions may be obscured by the complex structure. So goodwill, JV, SPEs, they are just more specific examples of this concern. So perhaps we can consider building that overarching concern into this bullet point. And I think that will help address some of the exposure draft respondents' suggestion around enhancing professional skepticism too. And I think it echoes A9A quite well. So that's a suggestion. My next comment is on A26, sorry, no A. So it's a requirement, 26A. So I'm looking at 26A, and then I'm looking at paragraph 44. And I wonder if we can just look at the distinction we're making between the list here versus 44 again. I think the way I see it, the intent is that paragraph 44 list comprises the final clearance package, right, that the group audit expects from the component auditor. And 26A sort of lists down the items that if you encounter it, you need to tell me ASAP. Now, a couple of questions here. First of all, I think some of the items in paragraph 44, I think we will want the component auditor to communicate the group audit auditor as soon as it comes to their attention. For example, NOCLA, for example, deficiency in internal control, suspected fraud, and so on. So that's my first question about the distinction of the list. And secondly, 26A here, we use the term timely basis. And I think we're trying to use timely basis to imply that you need to tell me ASAP. But I think timely basis really applies to everything, right? For a final clearance package, timely basis means at the end of that piece of work. So I'm just wondering whether we are, whether there's really a need to make that distinction between the two lists, or is there a ground for us to maybe combine the list in 26A and 44, and maybe just explain and emphasize the concept of timely better. And if we decide to do that, then you need to check the implication to other parts of the standard, including A1, 5A, and so on. So just another suggestion for the task force to think about. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Tom and Len. This comment I'm going to raise is a bit of a pervasive one, but the first time it pops up for me is in A55. So in the spirit of being efficient, this comment applies to A55, A72, B, C, and D, and A86 to 90, because it kind of permeates through the application material. And the issue is that in the requirement, we say the group auditor shall take responsibility for, and that implies that the component auditor could also do some of these activities as long as the group auditor takes responsibility for. In those application paragraphs I just referred to, we are stating that the group auditor does these activities. And so I think we just need to look at those application material paragraphs again and ensure they're consistent with what we have in the requirement. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Diane?
Okay, so I have two comments. One is on A56, third bullet. It's the sentence that you added that deals with IT. And my comment is, if you look at how you've described it in the sentence, those are all elements of ITGCs. And I just question whether or not that is going above and beyond, and it goes further than what we intended in terms of understanding the entity and its environment. It might be more prescriptive than it needs to be. So I would ask you just to take a look at that. And then my other comment is on 26A. Bear with me as I scroll down to that one. And this is about the communication from the primary team or group auditor, excuse me, to the component team, and talking about the timing of those communications. I think consider whether you want to build out a little bit more application material to address the requirements of 26A. I think in particular, the way that you've got it teed up here is you're going to communicate during matters related to the risk assessment, you're going to communicate related parties and going concern, but there could be other elements that are worthy of communication that happens between that group auditor and that component team. And I think that's a really important aspect of what we're trying to achieve here is enhance that communication, enhance that level of engagement between the two parties. So I would just ask you to consider some application material. I'll also send it through in some notes, but that was my second comment. Thank you.
Okay. We get to everyone, Len.
Yeah, those were helpful comments, particularly those comments on 26A, some comments about 44. The task force will take a look. I think we'll look at 26 and 44, that alignment, but at this point, we will talk about it later, but paragraph A111 probably will come into play as well as we look at some of those requirement and application materials in the communication area. So, but those were very helpful. And Julie, thank you for those detailed comments. Application paragraph, who should be doing the work, taking responsibility. Probably we need to do the same exercise we did with ISA 220 as well in trying to make it clear who's doing what. So those were very helpful for task force to work on. And Chengwei A56 and some examples you raised, we'll look forward to receive those comments offline. We'll look at into in terms how they link to A9A you talk about. So with that, and I think pretty much I don't see anything fatal flaw, but there's a lot of good comments in terms of enhancing the understandings in this section. So I really appreciate. So Tom, with that, perhaps we can move to the next section.
Sure.
So next section is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatements, and those are paragraph 26B, 26C in the requirement section, and application material A72B and A72I. And so I'll turn over to the board for comments.
Okay. 26B through 26C. Sue.
Thanks. I had an issue in A72D, and it's possibly a little bit similar to Julie's pervasive issue, because I think it's this piece about the group auditor taking responsibility for the risk assessment, but then that risk assessment for a specific component can be delegated to the component auditor. In A72D, it starts talking about the way in which that's done. But I think in 315, that talks about there being different ways in which risk assessment can be done using different methodologies. And so I would suggest we take a look at that to try and make sure that 315 is more methodology agnostic. It's sort of talking about one particular way. We've suggested some wording which may help. The other piece, which perhaps I'll bring it up here rather than when we repeating it later, is that I think in this area it's not entirely clear either whether in order to satisfy the group auditor's responsibility for the group risk assessment, that the risk assessment procedures performed by the component auditor then have to reside in the group auditor's file, or whether the taking responsibility can be evidenced in different ways. And I think that's a very practical matter that would be helpful to get some clarification. Thank you.
Sachiko?
Thank you. I have a comment on paragraph 26, big C. It states the group auditor shall include the work of component auditors in the evaluation. And I think it is helpful if the task force consider using another word such as consider instead of include. This is because the current word may be read as if it is required for the group auditor to technically include all the work of the component auditor itself, which implies that the group auditor is required to understand every detail matters of the component auditor's work that are really not necessary for the group auditor to take responsibility for the assessment of risk material statement of group financial statement. So perhaps it may be just a wording, but it is very helpful if you can take a look at that. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks, Tom and Len. One comment in the section and is 26C, and it's similar to Sachiko's comment, but we also thought maybe taking a look at how you've written paragraph 49 and the reference to 330 in paragraph 49, you could copy that premise back up here in 26C, because I think that would help. And we provided you some thoughts on that offline. Thanks.
Thank you. Isabel?
Some would remember that we were working as a team with Sachiko not so long ago. And so the French-Japanese team is often aligned. And it's funny, I had exactly the same comment on 26C than the one that was raised by Sachiko. Maybe being a non-English speaker, we take the word with their primary meaning. So when you have to include, you have to physically include, and so the expectation would be that it's all the work is included in your documentation, and it's not what we mean. So my suggestion was take into account. I heard that Sachiko had considered maybe we should have a look at the scale we prepared for CUSP project, where we try to give a meaning to all the words to determine the most appropriate wording, but include was an issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Len, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thank you for all those input. I think they're very, very helpful on 26C. Or task force will take a look. And Isabel, yes, something maybe we need to speak to the CUSP working group as well. Consider all those language or take into account. I think Eric's on the Eric has in our task force have a strong opinion about taking into account. So we had a long debate as well. So we'll take that, and helpful comments about other area in the A72D, A72I section. On the documentation, I think that'll come up in terms of associate comments on A72I. So we're likely to address that in a discussion tomorrow as well. So with that, I didn't hear anything any fatal flaw comments. I think they were very helpful suggestions. Need to clarify some of the paragraphs and looking for additional application materials, examples. So we will take that on board as a task force going forward. So with that, maybe we can continue and tackle along and go to the next section on materiality, if that's okay. So the next section, materiality requirement 29 to 30 related application material, A73 to A77B. There hasn't been a lot of changes in these sections. I think the board was largely pretty comfortable in the materiality sections, realizing that there's only so much we can do in 600. Majority of the guidance principles are sitting in ISA 330. There's one change we made here that was noting is paragraph 29A. The term shall be lower. Some suggestions saying that maybe you should change to shall not be greater than the group performance materiality. So we explain in the issues paper that the task force continue to feel that the language shall be lower would be the right term to describe that. But we'll be interested to hear board members' view on that. So with that, I'll turn over back to you, Tom.
Okay, on the materiality paragraph. Okay, I don't see any hands. I take that as a sign of support for where the task force is heading.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful, so we don't have to go back to that issues coming September. So continuing on, the next sections on responding to risk of material misstatements, paragraph requirement 33 to 40, application material A86 to A102. As described in the issues paper, you would note that changes in paragraph 33, those some restructuring, and paragraph 34 try to be responsive in terms of the in the areas of fraud. A89A, we add this paragraph to address comments related to at least providing more guidance when there are large number of components that are individually insignificant. So with that, Tom, I'll turn to you for board's input.
Okay, 33 to 40, responding to risk of material misstatement. Diane.
Thanks, Tom. I have one comment on paragraph A89A. I like the paragraph. I was thinking whether we could add a little bit more beef to it in terms of a couple examples. For instance, when I think about my group audits, and I do focus on these individually insignificant, one of the things that we look for is to see if there are significant accounts. The component in totality may be insignificant, but they could have a large cash balance, they could have a large inventory balance. And in that case, if that account is materially significant, we'll go on to do some work on it. So I just ask you to think about maybe some suggestions. I agree that auditor judgment will come into this, but just again, in the application, offering up some suggestions. And the other one would be an analytical review or something that you would do at that component level. So just suggestions, but I do like the paragraph and I think it's helpful.
Thank you, Diane. Yosh.
Thank you, Tom. Just one comment I have. The statement, paragraph 89, the last sentence, the statement of that the use of automated tools and techniques is helpful was added, paragraph 89 this time, but there's no description of why it is helpful, and the meaning of this sentence is not clear for me. It would be better to address the ATT in the guidance as well as in the technology project. If this description is accepted, it would be necessary to add such ATT description in other ISAs, I think. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Thanks, Tom. And Len, a couple of comments in this section. In A93A, I disagree with what you have there, but when I read what the comments were in the issues paper that came up on the ED, so the respondents to the ED, I thought maybe they were taking it one step further, because what we have here is that the component auditor may need information from the group auditor if there's centralized testing of controls, because they need to have that information in order to design or execute on procedures at the component level. Maybe what I was reading into the respondents' comments was that they were also thinking about a situation where that component auditor may need to use some of that work as opposed to just obtaining information. So, and maybe I read too much into it, but that is a really practical issue that pops up on group audits all the time, and particularly even more so now when a lot of entities are doing centralized processes. So they have a shared service center, or they have a centralized process that covers a number of significant accounts. So I just wondered if the task force might want to look at those respondent comments one more time and just ensure we've addressed it. And if we're not including something, that we have a reason for why not. And then in 34 little b, and it's probably just the wording here, but 34 little b to me is a risk assessment procedure. And I think at this point in the standard, or the other bullets within this requirement, are talking about responding to risk. And so it felt a little bit out of place there, mixed in with other responding requirements. And this one felt like a risk assessment requirement to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Chun-Wei?
Thanks. So my comments on 34B. I appreciate the add. I just wonder if it'd be helpful to maybe add a bit of context to it. I think a big part of it will be done as part of C, which is the evaluation of the appropriateness, completeness, accuracy of the console adjustment, and so on. So what else are we expecting the group auditor to undertake? I think it would be helpful to provide maybe some application material to sort of reinforce it. I assume part of the consideration is how complex group structure provides greater opportunity for fraud. And perhaps we can also consider referencing A9A and A72G. Thanks.
Thank you. Roger?
Then the points on A90C, and it relates to further procedures on the entire financial information on a component, and whether that is also meant to cover a full scope audit engagement for a subsidiary. So it's been an issue that's been raised before, and we're just seeking clarity as to whether or not that is also related to the full scope audit engagement. So if you could do that, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Imran?
Yes, thank you. Quick comment to say that I have shared with Len the feedback I received from some inspectors who had a look at these changes, and they were particularly appreciative of what we've done in A89 and A89A. Thank you.
Okay. A number of comments that I'm sure the task force will want to respond to. One or two that may have been related to issues that have been discussed previously. So, Len, I turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you for the support for A89, A89A. I appreciate that. A89A, I think, Dan, if there are good examples, we're happy to consider them. So I'm looking forward to those offline comments. And we'll look at the A89 reference to ATT with the technology working group and staff. A39A, Julie, we'll definitely go back, look at the common letters again, make sure we address the right issue. So we'll put that on our work list. Let me see, anything else here? We'll take on board the 34B, 34C, those comments on some of the wordings and whether that's the right place, as Julie you suggested, and Ching-Wei, your suggestion to beef up in the application material. We'll take that, and we will address the clarification on Roger's point. Once the task force has another discussion on that. So thank you, Roger, for that. With that, I didn't see anything, but I see Josephine raise her hand. So Tom, would it be okay for Josephine to come in?
Yes, please.
Hi, everybody. Apologies for jumping in. Just on Roger's point, sorry, I heard what you were saying, that this is the section that's dealing with further audit procedures. So the risk assessment, this is not about the old idea of the full scope audit that we had in the extant standard. We've moved away from that. This is where the component auditor has been requested to perform further audit procedures in response to a risk assessment, the identification assessment of which has already been undertaken on the full financial information of the components. I just wanted to clarify that point to Roger. Thank you. Thanks, Len. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, anyone else like come in on this section? Len, could I make a proposal? I know they may be grouped, but could we have time possibly for paragraph 44? I think we deal with that as a standalone if you're open to that. That's the next one. I guess we're great. The next few paragraphs are grayed out, so that's for future consideration. Is that a reasonable proposal for the task force? 44 as a standalone?
Yep. I'm fine with that.
I think 45 may engender a little more comment based upon input that we received. So I'm conscious of time too, and I sort of had the mental model of 44 in my mind. Remember, this is also paragraphs A111A through A112A.
Right.
I'm sorry to adapt on it, but if we're going to we want to keep going on, but we won't have time to get through 45, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we don't have about 20 minutes, so probably that's a good idea. Focus on 44, and we have time. Maybe I can come back and deal with that group engagement team, group auditor issue that I didn't address earlier.
The straight group engagement team issue,
yeah.
I like to call it.
Yeah. So take Tom's suggestion. We'll focus on paragraph 44. I think some comments came through earlier as well already, but 44 and the related application material dealing with 44 were open for comments, as Tom suggested. And those application material are in A111A all the way to A112B.
Okay. Anyone with comments on paragraph 44? The first paragraph about communication about matters relevant to group auditors' conclusion. Wow. Maybe because of my pessimism, you're getting full support. I can be pessimistic. I'm a Philadelphia sports fan. Should we?
No, well, I raised it earlier. I just want to maybe just remind us. I raised a point when we were at 26A. So looking at 26A and 44 to see how we sort of synchronize the two. So my comments is stand. Right.
Okay, good point. Isabel?
Yes, minor point on A111, A112 big A. We have removed opinion in the subtitle just above, but we keep opinion in the second sentence of the paragraph. So what was our intention? Did we want to remove it or leave it? And why is it inconsistent right now?
Is there a quick response to Isabel? Or is this an unintended?
I think the A112A opinion means that in some of the firm's methodology, there's intra-office opinion, but that's not the same as a separate audit opinion on a component. So I think there's a distinction between the two. But also see if Dan and Jasper anything to add. I think that was our intention.
Let's see that. I think you described it. Isabel, any reaction?
Yes, because on 44H, we remove opinion.
Okay,
and we remove it in the title of the application material, but we leave it in the application material. So it seems it's consistent, at least.
We'll go back and take a look. I think 44H, they're talking about the group auditors overall, might be implying overall opinion on the components financial statements. But we're trying to address it more of within the engagement team, group auditor, component auditor, then it might be inter-office, intra-office opinion. But we'll take a look to make it clear.
Okay. I think we're done with 44 right now. I still think we should pause here. We have plenty of time tomorrow to finish up 600. Thank you to the board for making such succinct and targeted comments. I think we got through everything, but also had full discussion on the draft standard. I did want to give Len the opportunity to come back to our stray group engagement team reference in the draft standard.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So apology for not addressing that. There were a couple of comments on that issue. As you recall from the March meeting, there was a lot of comments from the ED, also some board member that expressed the confusion between what we had in ISO 220, the engagement team definition. Now the engagement team definition is comprised of both group auditors and component auditors. Then in the X10 600, you have the term group engagement team. That has caused confusions. We are trying to focus on that. It's a one single team. It doesn't matter where you locate, what area is the audit, but it should be one team. In the standards, we don't use the term component engagement team. It's a component auditor. And so we feel that to eliminate the confusion, having two different teams, so we're changing throughout the standards. Of course, we need to clean up, but as well, make sure we don't use that term again. Group engagement team definition is now going away to be replaced by the term group auditor. In our prior discussion with the board, there was a strong support to go with that. So I'm hearing that some people are restating group engagement team definition, or maybe some confusion that term is still being used. So I just want to make sure I clarify that term group engagement team is no longer used in the standard. So there's really no difference there shouldn't be any confusion or difference that who's a group auditor, who's a group engagement team, okay? That comment shouldn't exist because there's no more usage of group engagement team in the standards. If we have that in the draft, maybe we just didn't catch it. We'll make sure we do make changes throughout the standards. But there was a comment about whether we need to define having the term group engagement team definition in the new ISO 600. I personally feel that discussion already took place a couple of meetings ago. We had to receive clear direction that we'll go with the term group auditor. So I just want to make sure that we're not opening up that issues again. So with that, Tom, this is based on what I heard from our discussion earlier today, but if I misheard or misunderstood the comments, happy to have the board members to raise them.
That's why I called it the stray group engagement team. If that phrase appeared in the document, I can understand why people would want it defined. But in this world where we've already opined on this, and I really hope we're not going to reopen this issue. There's no need to define a term that shouldn't appear in the document. That's the task force's position, right?
Right.
Isabel?
Yes, one of the reasons why I raised it was that the group engagement team does appear in A35A, A35A. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that people misunderstood the definition of group auditor, because for them it was the equivalent of group engagement team without reading all the detail and not having the difference. For them, group auditor was the equivalent of group engagement team. So I agree they should have read better the definition, but having only the definition of group auditor, they were misreading it. Thank you.
Yes, you found the stray reference, and so we apologize for creating the confusion, but that's the point. The task force will clean that up and deal with any ambiguity that exists here or elsewhere in the standard. I think that's the clear thrust. Okay, I'm gonna pause today. We have still some to go on this standard, and some of the issues that we've more recently grappled with, so they're less settled. So task force is really going to appreciate your input tomorrow and direction as we move towards a near final draft in September. I do want to give the opportunity to Michael and to Jim Dalkin to comment if they would like on what they've heard so far today.
Thanks, Tom. I don't really have any additional comments today. I think some of the concerns brought about by the CAG previously have been addressed. So it seems like it's going in a good direction. Thanks.
Michael?
Yes, I agree that the discussions are very positive and constructive. I'm encouraged to see the focus by both the task force and the board as a whole on the public interest issues and on responding as best they can to the comments of the stakeholders. So good direction, I think.
Thank you. I also should mention that we'll deal with any of the remaining issues that are highlighted in the issues paper tomorrow, but not directly addressed in the standard, its draft standard itself. Too, thank you, Michael, for that. I really like the way the discussion was going on. I like the interaction on the public interest issue that Imran raised, and then the working towards this refined approach. It sometimes just requires us to bring these issues up, and then it isn't the binary here. It's we're all trying to be responsive to the public interest here, and it just hearing each other discuss what the intent is, we get to a better solution. So that was really good, and I think we've been doing a really nice job this week on all the documents on really honing in and figuring out where the differences are or perceived differences and getting to it. So I really like that and encourage that going forward. And it's always good to have different voices at the table. So any other comments that people want to make today? Len, Jasper, Dan, Vili, on behalf of the task force. Len?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Maybe it's not related to 600, but I'm not sure when's the best time to raise it. But there's a survey going out. We are trying to get board's input and in terms of getting back to normal. I know tomorrow's the last day for the survey, but don't wait until last minute to alert you there's a survey going on. It'll be very helpful. I think we're looking forward to meeting in person. It's been more than 18 months. So your survey input will be helpful in terms of getting back to normalcy. So Tom, I just want to alert the deadlines tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Len, for raising that. Okay, any other comments? I'm encouraged by the direction we're going. I feel like we're improving this draft every time. We're knocking off some of the big fundamental issues, and addressing the public interest issues at the same time. Anyone else like to say anything? Oh, have a great day to everyone. I will see you tomorrow again, and we'll finish up group audits. I'll speak to you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.